Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Driven Wyld. Today we are talking about no taxes on tips. Recently I got an email from one of my subscribers, Anthony B. Thank you so much for emailing me about this and making this video possible. And what he brought to my attention was something I knew about because I am somewhat keeping up with how the presidential campaign is going. But I was not really going to talk about it, but because this has been brought to my attention by a subscriber, I guess I will. So with that said, we are talking about everything that is being said in this email, how it actually is for us as gig workers, for people who work on tips in general, how tipping culture has been over time, and everything in between. So with that said, let's get started. Hey Joe, I know you avoid politics like a no-tip order. However, a particular candidate made a promise to remove taxes on tipped income. This would be a major economic game changer for all tipped workers, especially gig workers. I would like to hear your thoughts on the matter. How would you see tax-free tips affecting the gig economy? I'm going to address this email in the following ways. I'm going to address the concept of this is a presidential campaign pitch and the prospect of the real-world application of this. This isn't left side, right side, what I believe is right, what I believe is wrong on a political level. And yes, I do normally avoid politics like a no-tip order, so I am simply going to acknowledge the facts as it stands. First off, Donald Trump made a campaign pitch to a bunch of service workers in Nevada about having no taxes on tips. That said, that could simply just be a pitch in a campaign that he says he's gonna do, but doesn't actually implement. Is it possible that he does? Yes. Is it going to actually happen? I don't know, but I feel like I've also heard the wind blow before. That said, when Donald Trump did go into presidency the first time, he made a bunch of executive orders right out of the gate. So it wouldn't surprise me if he actually followed through right off the bat. That is as far as I'm willing to talk about as far as the presidential campaign. Second, let's talk about the real world application of tips today. Tips today as a whole tipping culture, not just gig work or servers or anything of that effect, but how people have adopted tipping into various different industries is unbelievable to me. For example, wedding dresses. One of my cousins is actually getting married soon, and they had a gratuity screen on a wedding dress. It doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize a 10% tip is $60 still. And they're already trying to budget to make sure that they can actually pay for this wedding. Not to mention how landlords are expecting tips at times as well. As somebody who works for tips, it's hard to fight against the prospect of tipping without hurting yourself. But what ends up happening is all of these bigger industries with higher ticket values start implementing gratuity screens. And because of that, a lot of people are tip fatigued because they're getting the habitual practice of saying no, and that's affected us, or they're just lowering the values at which they tip in the real world. Nevertheless, sometimes it's just a way for people to weaponize price gouging without calling it price gouging. And then there are people who actually work for tips, servers, street performers, gig workers, that are the ones getting affected. Now, what about the people who say,
I always tip in cash and after service?
And they're not just saying it for social media, in the comment section to kind of gaslight other gig workers into taking no tip orders, when in reality, in real world practice, that's not what happens. I'm talking about the people that actually do tip cash. Some people just casually forget to add it to their IRS tax bill, but how you handle that is up to you. Either way, tips are normally subject to both income and payroll taxes according to the Federal Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Not to mention federal income tax, which has also been put on the table to be removed, but that's a totally different conversation. But let's pretend for a second that tips are no longer taxed, federal income tax is removed, as this one candidate is promising. How would that affect us in the gig economy? First off, if you're in a no state income tax state as well, you're gonna basically be working with no taxes. Think about that for a second. You report your income. There's no federal income tax. There's no state income tax. There's no taxes on tips. All that money is going to be yours. Now, granted, the companies are still going to be paying income tax as well, and they're still going to be paying payroll tax as well, but that's still a big win overall. Now, let's also apply this in such a way to where how would the companies be looking at this? Well, first off, DoorDash has already been trying to steer away from the tipping system entirely. I don't know if you noticed that. They're starting to implement lower and lower gratuity screens in certain markets with certain programs and everything else, like Earn by Mile has been a pilot program that they've launched. New York City, they took away upfront tipping entirely. In Seattle, they reduced it pretty hard. And I think this would be the push to bring it back, but it would also be the push to be like, you're not even going to be taxed anymore. That's a good reason for us to go from a $2 base pay to a $0 base pay. And since they're not being charged by the government, why don't we actually have a charge for ourselves instead of being 100% tips to us, we'll make it 95% tips. Or maybe we'll go back to a tip pooling system. You know, the thing they got sued for being accused for stealing tips? If that were to happen today, that would be a mega loss for a lot of people. In terms of how the companies would punish our income for us getting something good. Because the gig economy is funny because when good things happen, companies like to find a way to ruin it. Uber could do the same thing. Grubhub can do the same thing. Instacart might reduce the base pay even further, but because we're doing the shopping, I don't know. But then what would happen after that is a lot of companies would open themselves up to lawsuits because of the nature of the base pay being so low. Because that would literally be slave labor. Imagine getting orders to your phone for $0.00 over and over again. No tip orders would never be delivered, not even by the dumbest of dashers. I think that's the only thing that is stopping DoorDash from actually going zero base pay, because even the dumbest dashers are like,
well, at least we're making some money back, even though we're not being tipped 100% of the time.
If they were being paid $0 flat out, no tip orders would never be delivered. Either way, I do believe that this would be overall beneficial to us if the systems as it is today stay the way it is. But companies don't like to do that. I think if the president or whoever the president may be were to implement this, there would need to be some regulation on gig companies who have been overall abusing drivers for way too goddamn long. There would need to be regulation on those who can even request gratuity at all, because I think tipping culture has leaked into areas it definitely shouldn't have. And then there would have to be a response to what the gig companies have been doing and will do in response to us getting that. Because gig companies don't help gig workers. They help themselves using gig workers. Anyway, I would like to keep this conversation as non-political as possible. Let me know what you think of the real-world application of tax-free tips in the gig economy in the comments. Let's make sure we have every perspective heard, and we can make the most amount of money in the least amount of time in the safest possible way. If you guys would like to email me on something happening in your market as well, my email is drivenwyld@gmail.com. Feel free to email me there, and who knows, maybe you'll get a shout out in a video as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.